Outsiders rarely came here, and when they did, they were met with eyes that measured, judged, and often condemned before a word was spoken. Among the villagers, no figure drew more whispers than Alexandra. She had been widowed young. Her husband, a farmer, had died in an accident with his own sickle, leaving her alone in a small wooden house at the edge of the rice fields. Alexandra did not age the way other women in the village did. Her skin was still pale, her lips full, her hair dark and heavy, falling down her back like a river at night. She wore simple clothes, but somehow even the faded red kabaya she often chose seemed to cling to her body in ways that stirred hunger and jealousy alike. The men could never look at her without lowering their voices. At the warung, they muttered about her eyes, about the way she walked to the well with a sway in her hips she perhaps never intended. They laughed crudely, saying her body called to them even when she stayed silent. The women, their faces hardened by sun and work, looked at Alexandra with envy and suspicion. They called her a temptress, a woman who did not deserve respect because she lived alone and smiled too rarely. Every gesture she made, no matter how small, was turned into a story of secret desire. Alexandra knew all of this. She heard the laughter when she passed by. She saw the wives pulling their husbands away when she entered the market. And though she carried herself with calm, the smile she forced onto her lips never reached her eyes. Beneath her beauty was a loneliness that pressed on her chest each night, a suffocating silence that grew heavier with every cruel word. It was on a humid afternoon when Clara Shiel arrived in the village. She was not from here. Her pale skin and dark foreign clothes marked her as an outsider instantly. A traveler who had wandered far, Clara came in search of quiet. She was tired of noise and cities, of strangers who pretended to care. The village seemed still, untouched, a place where stories moved slowly. Yet as soon as she stepped onto the dusty path, she felt something unsettled beneath the surface, as though the soil itself held secrets it refused to bury. Clara noticed Alexandra on her first evening. The widow walked alone, carrying a basket of cassava from the fields. Even from a distance, Clara saw the way the villagers' eyes followed her, some sharp with mockery, others heavy with lust. Alexandra did not return a single gaze. She looked straight ahead, her posture rigid, her steps careful. But there was a fragility in her expression, a shadow behind her forced calm that caught Clara's attention. Later, at the inn where she stayed, Clara heard the whispers. The innkeeper's wife leaned close, voice bitter as she spoke of Alexandra. She thinks herself too beautiful to grieve. A woman like her will bring ruin. Men lose their minds when they see her. She should have left the village after her husband died. Clara listened without comment, but the tone of the woman's words clung to her. It was not just gossip. It was venom. The following days made the picture clearer. Everywhere Alexandra went, eyes followed. At the well, men pretended to help carry her water jars, only to brush too close. At the market, women refused to sell her fish until she lowered her eyes. Children mocked her behind her back, repeating their parents' words. She lived inside a cage of scorn, and no matter how gracefully she endured it, the cracks were showing. Clara watched all this quietly. She felt an unease she could not name. Alexandra's smile was thin, like a mask stretched too tight. When their eyes met once at the edge of the fields, Clara saw the truth. Despair, barely hidden beneath the surface. Something inside Alexandra was breaking, and the village, instead of offering compassion, pressed its weight harder on the wound. That night, the crickets screamed in the dark, and the moon sank behind a wall of clouds. Clara lay awake, thinking of the widow in red. She did not know yet that this woman's pain would seep into the very bones of the village, that the soil beneath the bamboo groves would soon drink more blood than rain. But already she sensed it. There was a silence that felt too heavy, a stillness that trembled, waiting to burst. And at the center of it all was Alexandra, alluring and lonely, a woman everyone desired, everyone despised, and no one truly understood. The night festival was meant to be a celebration, a ritual to honor the harvest and to please the spirits believed to guard the rice fields. Bamboo poles lined the square, their tips burning with oil-soaked rags that sent thick smoke curling into the sky. Drums beat a steady rhythm. Laughter rose with the clatter of cheap rice wine cups, and the air smelled of sweat, roasted meat, and fermented alcohol. Clara stood at the edge of the crowd, trying to blend in, though her foreignness made her stand out wherever she went. She had been told the festival was harmless, a gathering of joy. But as the night grew deeper, she saw how the joy twisted. The men drank too much, their voices louder, their bodies swaying with unsteady steps. Their eyes searched for distraction, and eventually all eyes landed on Alexandra. She had come dressed simply, her red kabaya faded, a thin scarf draped over her hair. She carried no jewelry, no paint on her lips, but she was still the most striking figure in the square. The men's whispers grew into shouts, then into taunts. One man, already staggering, shouted her name and laughed, pointing as if she were a spectacle. Others joined in, clapping their hands and demanding that she dance. Alexandra tried to walk away. Her eyes stayed low, her steps quick, but the circle closed around her. Rough hands grabbed her arms, blocking her path. The women of the village looked on with tight lips, some clutching their children's shoulders, others turning away entirely. Not one voice rose in protest. Clara felt her chest tighten. She wanted to push forward, to stop what was happening, but her feet felt anchored to the ground. She was an outsider. She had no power here. Her voice would be drowned by the mob. The men pressed closer. Someone yanked at Alexandra's scarf, pulling it free and tossing it into the fire. The torchlight caught the strands of her hair, and a roar of laughter followed. She gasped and tried to cover herself, but hands tore at her sleeves. The fabric ripped. The drumbeat seemed to grow harsher, merging with the sound of tearing cloth, the jeers of drunken men, the silence of the women. "Show us what you hide, widow," one man bellowed, his breath heavy with sour wine. Alexandra cried out, but the sound was swallowed by the noise. Her kabaya was pulled open, her body exposed under the trembling flames. The crowd erupted in crude laughter, a chorus of voices mocking her skin, her breasts, her womanhood. The men poked at her, jeered as she tried to cover herself with shaking hands. Every attempt at dignity was torn away. Clara's stomach churned. She wanted to scream, to throw herself between Alexandra and the crowd, but she knew the futility. She was alone, and the villagers were a mass, drunk on cruelty. She could only watch, her nails digging into her palms, her throat raw from words she could not release. Alexandra's face was pale with shame, her eyes wide with tears that reflected the firelight. She did not fight back. She did not struggle violently. She simply endured, trembling as hands groped and pushed, as laughter swelled higher than the drums. Her body, once the subject of whispers and envy, had become a spectacle, a weapon used against her. The men shouted as if this were sport. "The widow is ours tonight," one howled. Another spat near her feet. The women still said nothing. Some looked away, some smirked with cold satisfaction. Alexandra was utterly alone in her humiliation. Finally, when the men grew bored, they let her go. Her clothes hung in tatters, her body marked by rough hands and scratches. She pulled the scraps of fabric around herself and staggered through the ring of firelight, disappearing into the shadows. No one stopped her. No one reached out to help. Clara's legs moved before her mind decided. She tried to follow, weaving through the drunken crowd, but by the time she broke free, Alexandra was gone. The path behind the houses was empty, only the echo of her footsteps fading into the dark. Clara stood in the silence of the back path, her chest heaving. She pressed her hand to her mouth, fighting the bile rising in her throat. The festival still roared behind her, but it felt distant now, like a nightmare muffled by smoke. She knew she had witnessed something that could not be undone. The widow's fragile smile, the one Clara had seen in the daylight, was shattered. What remained of Alexandra was walking deeper into the night, carrying shame heavier than any wound. Clara felt the air shift, cold against her skin, and she knew with an unshakable certainty that the village had crossed a line. Somewhere in the distance, the drums continued. But beneath them, Clara thought she heard another sound, the faint sob of a woman breaking apart, and the night swallowed it whole. The path away from the festival was narrow, lined with weeds and uneven stones. Alexandra's bare feet moved slowly, her body hunched beneath the tatters of her clothes. Her arms clutched the rags to her chest, though there was little left to cover. Her tears blurred the path, but she did not stumble. Every step was heavy with shame, with the echo of laughter that still rang in her ears. The village was alive with noise behind her, yet where she walked it was silent, too silent. Crickets hushed, dogs did not bark, even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The darkness deepened as she reached the edge of the bamboo grove, where no one dared to go after nightfall. Beyond the grove stood the old well, abandoned for years, its stones cracked, moss crawling over them like disease. Children whispered that spirits lived in its depths, but Alexandra felt no fear. She felt only emptiness, a void too wide to fill. She stopped before the well and let the remnants of her kabaya fall from her fingers. The night air struck her naked skin, cold but insignificant compared to the burning humiliation inside her. She touched her hair, long and heavy, and slowly began to twist it into a tight rope. Her hands shook, but her movements were steady, deliberate. She looped it around the bent wooden beam above the well, the same beam villagers once used to hoist buckets of water. The rope of hair was not strong, yet Alexandra knew it was enough. She stepped onto the edge of the stone rim, her toes curling over the black mouth of the well. The water below was invisible, a void that promised silence. She closed her eyes, and the laughter of the men returned to her, their jeers, their fingers, the firelight on their mocking faces. Her lips trembled, and words slipped out, not prayers, not pleas. Her voice was raw, heavy with venom. May their laughter choke them. May their eyes never close in peace. May their bodies be torn as mine was torn. May their wives watch them die. May their children inherit nothing but ashes. The night seemed to listen. The air thickened, pressing against her skin. A cold wind rose from the well, though no water had moved in it for years. Alexandra inhaled once deeply, and with a final exhale, she leaned forward. The rope tightened, her body jerked, and her feet kicked into emptiness. There was no scream, only the creak of the beam, the rustle of hair under strain, and then the stillness of death. Alexandra's face, once beautiful, twisted with the final breath, but her eyes, open wide, held a glimmer of something more than pain. They held promise. Minutes passed, perhaps hours. The festival drums faded into silence, one by one, until the village itself seemed to fall asleep. But the well did not sleep. A faint mist began to rise from its depths, curling around Alexandra's hanging body. It wrapped her like a shroud, seeping into her hair, her skin, her mouth frozen mid-curse. The mist pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat. The bamboo around the well swayed, though no wind touched them. A bird fell from its perch, dead without a sound. The frogs that had croaked by the rice fields ceased, their throats swollen, their eyes staring blank. Even the insects were silent, as if nature itself recoiled. And then the silence broke. From Alexandra's open mouth slipped a whisper, though her body no longer breathed. It was low, dragging, carried on the mist. "I will return." The words sank into the ground, into the stones of the well, into the roots of the bamboo. The curse spread like ink in water, unseen but unstoppable. It seeped into the air, the soil, the homes where men slept with full bellies and careless hearts. They did not know yet that their fate had already been written in Alexandra's final breath. By the time the first rooster crowed, her body still hung there, lifeless, her hair swaying like a pendulum. But the well was no longer just stone and shadow. It was an open wound, a gate. And inside its blackness, something moved, something hungry. The village would wake to another morning, thinking the night had passed like any other. But soon, they would learn that Alexandra had not gone quietly into death. She had left behind a curse, and it was alive. The morning was heavy with damp air, a fog clinging to the bamboo groves and rice paddies. Villagers stirred slowly, fetching water, lighting small fires for porridge. It should have been an ordinary day, but a scream shattered the calm. It came from the western edge of the village, sharp and shrill, pulling everyone from their doorways. Feet pounded the dirt paths, children ran ahead of their mothers, and men gathered with sickles still in their hands. The scream had come from the hut of Suro, one of the men who had dragged Alexandra by her arms during the festival. His wife, pale and shaking, stumbled outside, pointing with trembling hands. Inside, the air smelled wrong. It was thick with iron, with rot, with something that made the skin prickle before a single glance was taken. Clara, drawn by the commotion, arrived at the hut's doorway just as the first villagers entered. She had seen death before, but nothing like this. Suro's body lay on the floor, or what was left of it. His chest was opened wide, not by a blade, but by something that had forced its way outwards, as though invisible arms had wrapped him in an embrace and then torn him apart. His ribs splayed like broken wings, his organs scattered in wet piles across the woven mat. His face was frozen in an expression of ecstasy, twisted into agony, eyes wide, lips stretched in a grotesque smile that looked both pleasured and terrified. Women gasped and covered their mouths. Men swore under their breath. Someone muttered, "Leek." Another whispered, "Gendruwo." The words spread quickly, heavy with fear. They were names for creatures of the night, spirits of hunger and rage. Yet none of the villagers could look at the body without thinking of Alexandra, though her name hung unspoken in the smoky air. Clara stood still, her nails pressing into her palms. She felt it, the same chill that had clung to the air the night Alexandra disappeared. A presence, familiar and undeniable, hovered in the hut. It was not the mark of a beast, not the chaos of an accident. It was deliberate, purposeful, a message written in blood and torn flesh. Suro's wife wailed, clutching her head, her cries filling the village. She screamed that she had slept beside him and heard nothing, that no intruder had entered, that her husband had simply convulsed, gasping for air before being ripped apart by something unseen. The villagers crossed themselves, muttering prayers, eyes darting toward the bamboo grove as though shadows might come alive at any moment. One old man spat on the ground. "This is her doing. The widow cursed us." His voice trembled, but he spoke aloud what many feared to say. A ripple of unease passed through the crowd. Some nodded, some shook their heads, but no one could deny that the timing was too cruel, too precise. Clara could not bring herself to speak. She remembered Alexandra's face that night, pale under torchlight, tears cutting through the dirt on her cheeks. She remembered the silence when Alexandra walked away, abandoned by all, even by Clara herself, who had stood frozen in fear. Now, in this hut, reeking of blood, Clara felt that Alexandra had not truly left. She was here, her presence heavy, her justice brutal. By midday, the hut had been sealed. Men carried Suro's remains in silence, their faces set in grim lines. Women whispered that the ground should not take him, that his death was unclean. Children clung to their mothers, eyes wide with confusion. The festival that had once been laughter now hung like a shadow over every home. That night, the village was restless. Fires burned brighter, doors were bolted, and prayers rose louder than usual. But Clara sat awake at her small window, watching the mist drift between the trees. She felt it curl and twist like fingers brushing against her skin. The mist smelled faintly of jasmine, just as Alexandra's hair had smelled the one time she passed close by. Clara's throat tightened. It was not just death. It was not random. It was Alexandra. She had returned, not as the fragile woman with a broken smile, but as something beyond flesh. Something that reached through shadows, caressed her tormentors, and split them open with love turned monstrous. And Clara knew this was only the beginning. It began with Suro, but it did not end there. His death was only the first drop in what became a flood. Within days, Another man from that night was found sprawled across his sleeping mat, his mouth a torn cavity, his tongue bitten off as if ripped by sharp teeth from inside his own throat. His wife swore she had heard him moaning in pleasure moments before the screams began, as though he were not dying but being seduced. When the villagers rushed in, they found him convulsing, blood spraying from his mouth, his face frozen in an expression of twisted ecstasy. Fear spread quickly, crawling under the skin of every household. Men who had once laughed at Alexandra now slept with weapons beside their beds, but no blade to protect them. One by one, they were taken in ways too precise to be accidents, too cruel to be natural. A man was found hanging upside down in his hut, his genitals ripped away and stuffed into his mouth. Another had his skin peeled carefully from his body, draped across the wall like a sheet, while his corpse lay trembling beneath it, still alive long enough to whimper before silence claimed him. The women began to scream at night, not only from terror, but from the things they saw. One woman claimed she woke to see her husband lying with Alexandra's ghost, her long hair covering him like a veil before his chest split open under invisible hands. Another swore she heard laughter from the old well, laughter that slid beneath doors and seeped into dreams. Children began to vanish, pulled away from their beds with no footprints left behind. The villagers whispered that Alexandra was building a kingdom of shadows, that she needed their children to follow her into the well's depths. Paranoia rotted the village faster than death itself. Neighbors accused neighbors. Wives accused their own husbands of inviting the curse by joining in the laughter that night. Some tried to flee, but their bodies were found at the edge of the fields, their faces eaten away as though by invisible mouths. The bamboo groves swayed with no wind, and when people looked too long into them, they claimed to see a pale figure standing just beyond the trees, a woman naked, her hair swaying like a rope, her eyes glowing faintly with hatred and sorrow. Clara felt the change in the air. Each night, the mist grew thicker, wrapping around houses, slipping through cracks in wooden walls. She could not sleep, she could only listen. Sometimes she heard whispers, her name spoken softly in a woman's voice, almost tender. Sometimes she heard moans, long and drawn out, echoing through the night like the sound of love turned into torment. She knew it was Alexandra. She knew the widow had returned, not just to punish, but to make the village suffer as she had suffered, humiliated, stripped bare, torn apart not only in body but in spirit. The corpses multiplied until no family was untouched. Funerals were abandoned. There were too many dead to bury. The villagers left bodies where they fell, too afraid to approach. Flies swarmed, rats grew bold, and the stench of blood clung to every breath of wind. The once green rice fields lay untended, stalks bending under the weight of decay. The village itself began to rot, walls collapsing, doors left swinging open as families huddled in corners, waiting for a death they could not fight. One evening, Clara stood at the well where Alexandra had ended her life. The stones were wet, though no rain had fallen. The air smelled of iron mixed with the faint sweetness of jasmine. As she stared into the darkness below, she thought she saw movement, hair floating just beneath the surface, eyes gleaming pale. She stepped back, heart pounding, knowing that Alexandra was no longer simply a memory. She was alive in every shadow, in every whisper, in every corpse split open as though embraced too tightly by invisible arms. The village had become a place of waiting, a cage of fear, where every man who had laughed that night now counted his hours. And Clara understood that Alexandra would not stop until all of them were gone, until the village itself was emptied, left as nothing but blood, silence, and her curse drifting on the wind. That night, Clara tossed restlessly on her mat. The village outside was silent except for the occasional dog barking and the rustle of bamboo in the wind. But in her dreams, the silence was replaced by something heavier, darker. She was no longer in her small room, but standing in the square where the festival had taken place. The torches were still burning, The smell of wine and smoke thick in the air. Alexandra was there, naked, her body pale under the flickering light. Her long black hair covered her face like a curtain, hiding her eyes, her mouth, but not her voice. She stood with her arms slightly open, as though inviting an embrace. When she spoke, her voice was soft, almost a whisper, but it filled the square as if the earth itself carried her words. They laughed. The words crawled into Clara's bones. Alexandra's head tilted, the strands of her hair shifting as if alive. They laughed, she repeated, her voice trembling now with rage. They will choke on their laughter. Clara wanted to move, to step back, but her feet would not obey. She felt the ground sticky beneath her soles. Looking down, she saw it was covered in blood, thick, dark, endless. It reflected the torchlight like a mirror, and in it, faces floated. The men who had stripped Alexandra, their mouths open in grotesque grins, their eyes bulging as if they were drowning. The laughter rose again, but this time it was distorted, wet, bubbling with blood. Alexandra reached out a hand, her fingers pale and trembling. Clara felt it touch her cheek, cold, wet, yet almost tender. But when she looked again, her face was smeared with red. The blood dripped down her neck, staining her chest, soaking into her clothes. Alexandra's whisper grew louder, closer to a scream. They will choke, and you will see. Clara woke with a gasp, her lungs burning as though she had been underwater. The room was dark, only a faint glow of moonlight slipping through the cracks of the bamboo walls. She sat up, clutching her chest, trying to steady her breath. But when she lifted her hands, she froze. Her palms were wet, her fingers sticky. In the pale light, she saw the stains, dark red, unmistakable. Blood. It coated her skin, smeared across her arms, even spotting the blanket. She stumbled back, her heart hammering, searching for a wound, a cut, anything that would explain it. But there was none. Her skin was unbroken, her body whole. The smell reached her then. Iron, thick and metallic. It filled the room as though death itself had seeped into the walls. Clara's stomach lurched. She tried to wipe the blood on the mat, but it clung stubbornly, warm as if freshly spilled. Outside, the night seemed to shift. The mist crept along the ground, sliding through the cracks in her door, curling around her ankles like fingers. Clara backed away until her spine pressed against the wall. She could hear it now, a faint laugh, far away yet unmistakable. It was not human, not natural. It was Alexandra's laughter, low and broken, echoing as though from the bottom of the well. Clara whispered to herself, "It's not mine, it's not mine." But the blood remained, proof of a connection she could not deny. Alexandra had touched her, not only in dreams, but in waking. She was marked, bound to the widow's vengeance, whether she wished it or not. The village stirred restlessly that night. Dogs howled, roosters crowed too early, and the few men who still dared to sleep woke screaming, claiming they had felt hands around their throats. Some found their blankets soaked in water, others with stains they swore were blood, though they vanished by morning. The curse was spreading, no longer content to take only the guilty. It seeped into the innocent as well, into every wall, every breath. Clara sat in the corner until dawn, her hands raw from scrubbing, the blood never fully gone. She knew she had not killed anyone, yet she felt complicit, drawn deeper into Alexandra's shadow. The widow was not only hunting, she was choosing, and for reasons Clara could not understand, she had been chosen to witness it all. By the 7th night after Alexandra's death, the village was already half empty. The men who had mocked her were being slaughtered one after another, their bodies left in grotesque displays that no human hand could have made. The women wailed and covered their children's eyes, but the fear was not only for the corpses. They knew the killings would not stop. Every whisper circled back to the same answer. Alexandra had cursed them, and her spirit was walking among them. It was then that the surviving men, trembling and desperate, sought out a dukun from a neighboring valley. He arrived at dusk, an old figure in black cloth, his eyes sharp beneath heavy brows. He carried bundles of herbs, small jars of oil, and a rooster that flapped violently in his hands. The villagers gathered around him, their faces pale, their voices urgent as they begged him to trap the widow's spirit before no one was left alive. The Dukun listened without fear, though his hands tightened around his staff. He agreed to the ritual, but warned them. A woman wronged carries fire that cannot be put out by prayer alone. You laughed at her sorrow. Now you will pay in more than blood. His words made the men lower their heads, but still they clung to him as their only hope. That night, they led him to the abandoned well. Torches burned brighter than usual, their flames bending as if disturbed by an unseen wind. Offerings were laid out, rice, flowers, the rooster's blood spilled across the stones. The Dukun circled the well, chanting words that twisted like smoke in the air. He sprinkled salt and ash, drew symbols with his staff, and ordered the men to hold their ground. Clara stood in the shadows watching. She had not been invited, but she could not stay away. Her heart pounded with every chant, her skin prickling with the sense that something vast and dangerous was listening. The Dukun's voice rose higher, his eyes rolling back as he called on ancient forces to bind Alexandra's spirit. The fire flared, sparks flying into the night. For a moment, the air thickened, heavy and suffocating. Then the wind stopped altogether. Silence fell. Even the crickets dared not sing. At first, the villagers thought it was working. The well bubbled faintly, a mist rising from its depths. The rooster's blood hissed as if boiling on the stones. The Dukun shouted, pressing his palm flat against the mossy rim. But then the mist changed. It twisted, pulsing like a living thing, and from it came a laugh, soft, feminine, and cruel. The villagers froze. Clara's stomach dropped. The laugh grew louder, echoing from the depths, circling them like 1,000 whispers. And then she rose. Alexandra's form climbed out of the mist, not climbing so much as floating, her feet hovering above the stones. She was naked, her long black hair draped across her face, her body gleaming as though wet with moonlight and blood. She was beautiful, impossibly so. Yet her beauty was wrong, too sharp, too perfect, terrifying in its allure. Her arms spread wide as if to embrace them all. The men staggered back, some falling to their knees. One tried to run, but Alexandra's hair snapped forward like a whip, coiling around his neck and yanking him into the air. His scream choked into silence as his head twisted unnaturally, his body collapsing limp at her feet. The Dukun shouted incantations, throwing salt and ash into the air, but Alexandra only laughed louder. Her hair fanned out in every direction, seizing men by their arms, their throats, their waists. She pulled them close as though holding lovers, pressing their faces to her breast before their ribs cracked and their bodies split open in showers of blood. Their screams filled the night, mixed with the wet tearing of flesh. One man begged for mercy, crying that he had not touched her during the festival, only laughed. Alexandra tilted her head, her hair parting just enough to reveal one eye, dark, shining, and human. She whispered, her voice both tender and venomous, "Your laughter was enough." Then his body folded in half, bones snapping like twigs, and she tossed him aside as if discarding a broken doll. The women watching from a distance shrieked, clutching their children, but none dared to approach. Clara pressed a hand to her mouth, her heart slamming against her ribs. She wanted to look away, but she couldn't. Alexandra's figure was mesmerizing, radiant in horror, every movement both graceful and brutal. She was not just killing them. She was rewriting her humiliation, forcing them to feel the shame and terror she had endured, magnified 100-fold. The Dukun fell to his knees, blood dripping from his nose. His chants faltered. Alexandra floated toward him, her hair writhing like serpents. She bent close, her lips almost brushing his ear. "No cage can hold me. No fire can burn me. I am what you made me." With that, his chest split open from within, and he toppled lifeless into the dirt. When it was done, the ground around the well was slick with blood. Bodies lay broken, twisted, some missing faces, others nothing more than skin stretched across stones. Alexandra hovered above them, her laughter echoing into the night, rising and falling like a song. Clara felt tears sting her eyes. She should have been horrified, and she was, but part of her also felt the weight of justice. These men had destroyed Alexandra's dignity. Now Alexandra had destroyed them. Yet Clara knew this was far from the end. The widow's spirit was not satisfied. The village itself was doomed, and she would be forced to watch until nothing remained. Alexandra turned her head slightly, as though sensing Clara in the shadows. For a heartbeat, her laughter stopped. Her hair shifted, revealing a faint smile beneath the darkness of her face. Clara froze, unable to breathe. Then, as suddenly as she had appeared, Alexandra vanished back into the mist, leaving only silence and the stench of blood. The villagers would say the ritual failed, but Clara knew it was never meant to succeed. Alexandra had never been a spirit to be trapped. She had become something far greater and far more terrifying. The night after the failed ritual, the village dissolved into chaos. No one slept. Doors were bolted shut, windows barricaded with planks and stones. Lamps flickered weakly, shadows stretching long across the walls. Families huddled together, whispering prayers, clutching knives or sticks as if wood and steel could protect them from something not of this world. It began with a scream from the northern edge. A man was dragged from his hut, pulled into the dark by nothing visible. His wife chased after him, only to see his body hurled back against the wall, bones shattering with a sickening crack. His chest split open before her eyes, his heart plucked out and dropped into the dirt. She wailed, clawing at her own face, until her nails broke and blood streamed down her cheeks. The madness spread like fire. In another house, children cried for their mothers, but the mothers were gone, vanished into shadows that seemed to have mouths. Doors slammed, though no one touched them, and from behind the thin bamboo walls came the sounds of bodies tearing, wet and final. Every house became a slaughterhouse, every family a stage for Alexandra's vengeance. Clara ran. She stumbled barefoot through the narrow paths, the mist clinging to her legs like chains. All around her, the village fell apart, women screaming until their voices broke, men begging, children sobbing into silence. She tried to shut her ears, but the sounds pressed in from every direction, flesh ripping, bones snapping, the wet laughter of something not human. She turned down a path toward the rice fields, her lungs burning when the air grew colder. The mist thickened, swirling until it formed a shape in front of her. Alexandra. She floated just above the ground, naked, her hair streaming like black water, her face half hidden but her mouth visible, curved in a smile both tender and cruel. Her eyes glowed faintly behind the curtain of hair, locking onto Clara. Clara froze. Her legs trembled, but she could not run. Alexandra drifted closer, her movements slow, deliberate, almost graceful. She lifted a hand and touched Clara's cheek. The fingers were cold, slick with something wet, blood or water, Clara could not tell. The touch was affectionate, like a lover's caress, but it pierced Clara's skin with icy dread. "You saw," Alexandra whispered, her voice low, close, vibrating through Clara's chest. "You watched while they laughed. You did nothing." Clara's throat tightened. Tears welled in her eyes. I wanted to help," she stammered, her voice cracking. "I couldn't. I was afraid." Alexandra tilted her head, her hair shifting to reveal more of her face. Her beauty was haunting, perfect yet corrupted by sorrow. Her smile widened, showing teeth too sharp, too white. "Fear," she said softly. "Fear is why they live as monsters. Fear is why I am what I am now." Her fingers slid down Clara's cheek to her throat, resting lightly against her pulse. Clara's heart thrashed beneath her skin, beating against Alexandra's touch. She expected pain, expected her throat to rip open, but Alexandra only pressed gently, almost tenderly, as if to remind Clara how fragile she was. Behind them, another scream tore through the night. A man's voice, shrill, cut short by a gurgle. Alexandra's lips twitched. "Listen," she whispered. "Listen to their laughter choke." Clara squeezed her eyes shut, but the sound pressed into her ears anyway. The gasps, the gurgles, the final choking cries of men dying in shadows. Alexandra's hand left her throat and drifted back to her face, wiping away one of her tears with a bloodied fingertip. "You will see it all," Alexandra said. "Every drop, every scream, you are mine to witness." Clara opened her eyes, and Alexandra's face was inches from hers, beautiful and horrifying all at once. For a moment, she felt her own breath stop, her body shivering under that gaze. Alexandra leaned closer, her lips brushing Clara's ear. "They took my body," she whispered, voice trembling with fury and sorrow. "Now I take theirs, until nothing remains." Then she was gone, dissolving into the mist, leaving Clara trembling, her cheek cold where the touch lingered. Around her, the screams rose again, louder than before. The village was dying, one house at a time, and Clara knew Alexandra would not rest until every soul had been claimed. The night stretched on, endless, a chorus of death and madness, and Clara, powerless, could only stumble forward, caught between horror and the strange, suffocating intimacy of being chosen by the widow herself. The dawn came gray and sickly, as if the sun itself hesitated to rise over the ruined village. Smoke lingered in the air, and the cries from the night before had dwindled into silence. Clara moved carefully through the debris-strewn paths, her steps crunching over broken pottery, torn cloth, and the occasional smear of dried blood. The village was no longer alive. It was breathing its last breaths, every corner soaked in the memory of screams. Her body trembled from exhaustion, but her mind refused to rest. Alexandra's touch, her whisper, clung to her like a second skin. Clara felt marked, chosen not as a victim, but as a witness. She did not understand why until she stumbled upon the house at the far edge of the fields, the one that had belonged to Alexandra. The small wooden structure leaned tiredly, its roof sagging. Inside, the air smelled of old wood and dust, untouched since the widow's death. The villagers had avoided this place, as if her spirit lingered here more than anywhere else. Clara pushed open the door, her breath shallow, and entered. The hut was simple. A mat on the floor, a clay stove in the corner, and a trunk against the wall. What caught Clara's attention was the small bundle wrapped in faded cloth resting beside the trunk. She knelt, hands trembling, and unwrapped it. Inside was a book, worn, the leather cover cracked, its pages stained with age and tears. A diary. Clara sat cross-legged, the silence heavy around her, and began to read. The words were shaky, but full of longing. Alexandra had written not of seduction or pride, but of loneliness. She wrote of her husband, the farmer who had died too young, and the hollow life she carried afterward. She wrote of the whispers that spread through the village, of women accusing her of luring their husbands, of men making crude jokes when she fetched water. She described how she tried to keep her head down, to live quietly, to smile, even when her heart broke under the weight of their scorn. Clara's throat tightened as she read entry after entry. Alexandra was not the temptress the villagers had painted. She was a woman hunted by rumors, framed by jealousy and lust, destroyed not by her actions, but by the collective cruelty of those around her. Her words grew darker toward the final pages. She wrote of the fear she carried when men began following her at night, of the silence of women who should have been her sisters, of the night of the festival when she felt the eyes of the entire village turn her body into a spectacle. The last lines were smudged with ink and tears. "If they must see me naked, let them also see my curse. If they laugh at my shame, let them one day choke on their laughter." Clara covered her mouth, the tears spilling freely down her cheeks. The weight of the truth crushed her chest. The massacre was not random, not the blind rage of a ghost. It was justice, twisted into horror by the depth of Alexandra's wound. Every man who had laughed, every woman who had stayed silent, every child who had mocked her, they were not victims. They were participants in her ruin. She wept openly, rocking slightly as the book slipped from her hands. She felt both grief and shame. Grief for Alexandra, who had been more human, more fragile than anyone knew. Shame for herself, for standing frozen that night when she could have shouted, even if it changed nothing. She had been a silent witness then, and now she was chosen to be a witness again. but this time to the retribution. Outside, the wind rattled the bamboo, and Clara thought she heard Alexandra's laughter again, faint, carried on the air, but it no longer sounded cruel. It sounded broken, hollow, as if it came from a place of endless sorrow. Clara pressed her forehead to the diary, whispering through tears, "I'm sorry, I should have spoken. I should have been there." For a long time, she stayed in the hut, clutching the book, letting the truth settle like a stone inside her. The village was rotting under Alexandra's vengeance, but now Clara understood. It was not madness. It was not the chaos of a wandering ghost. It was the cold, deliberate hand of justice, shaped by pain too deep to contain. When Clara finally stepped outside, the mist clung low to the ground, and the smell of blood lingered. She looked at the deserted paths, at the empty huts, and she knew the village would not survive. Alexandra's curse was not finished. It would only end when the last laugh had been silenced. And Clara, whether she wanted it or not, would be there to see the final moment. Morning broke without bird song. The sky was pale and swollen with mist, casting a gray light over the village. Clara opened her eyes slowly, though she had not truly slept. She lay curled in Alexandra's hut, the diary pressed to her chest, her body trembling with the weight of everything she had witnessed. For a moment, she thought perhaps it had been a dream, some endless nightmare that would vanish with daylight. But when she stepped outside, the truth lay everywhere before her. The village was empty, yet it breathed with death. The paths were slick with blood, dark patches soaking into the dirt, leading in every direction like veins of the earth itself had burst open. Huts stood silent, doors yawning wide, their interiors stained with the remnants of slaughter. A handprint smeared across one wall. A child's doll lying in the mud, its face painted with someone's blood. Everywhere Clara looked, there were signs of the massacre, but no living soul. Not a scream, not a cry, not even the whimper of an animal remained. The air stank of iron, thick and metallic, mixed with something sweeter, jasmine. Clara's stomach twisted as she followed the scent to the well. It stood as it had before, stones cracked and moss-covered, but now the ground around it was soaked dark. The air above it shimmered faintly, and from its depths rose the mingled perfume of rust and flowers, death and beauty entwined. Clara gagged, pressing a hand to her mouth, yet she could not step away. She felt drawn to it, compelled, as if Alexandra's presence clung to her every breath. Then she heard it, faint at first, then clearer, the sound of laughter. Not loud, not triumphant, but soft, distant, echoing. It drifted across the mist like a memory that refused to die. Alexandra's laughter. It wound around Clara's heart, making her knees weaken. She wanted to cover her ears, but her hands would not move. It was not the laugh of madness. It was the laugh of a woman who had finally been heard, a sound of justice sharpened into cruelty. Clara's eyes burned as tears filled them again. She turned away from the well, stumbling back down the blood-streaked path. Each step carried her past another memory carved into the ground. The streak of fingernails where a woman had clawed the earth, the broken roof beams where a body had been hurled, the dark stains that marked where men had fallen, torn apart by the very shadow they once mocked. She walked through it all in silence, her face blank, her eyes hollow. There was no one left to speak to, no hand to reach for, no voice to break the emptiness. Clara was the only one who had survived, and she did not know if it was a gift or a curse. Alexandra had touched her, had chosen her to witness the village's end, and now she carried that weight inside her like a second soul. By the time Clara reached the edge of the bamboo grove, the mist was thinning, the first weak rays of sunlight piercing through. She turned once to look back. The village was small and broken, its roofs sagging, its paths blackened with blood. It no longer looked like a place where life had ever thrived. It looked like a wound carved into the land, a scar that would never heal. The wind shifted, carrying with it one last whisper of jasmine and laughter. Clara shuddered. She knew what would come next. Travelers would pass this way and find the silence, They would see the blood, smell the iron, feel the weight of something watching them from the well. And the story would spread. They would tell of a widow stripped and humiliated before her people, who took her own life and returned to tear apart all who mocked her. They would say her spirit embraced men until their bodies split, that her hair coiled like ropes to drag the guilty into darkness, that her laughter still echoed on the wind. They would whisper a warning. Any man who humiliates an innocent woman will meet the same fate, torn apart by the widow's vengeful embrace. Clara lowered her gaze, her feet moving forward, away from the village, away from the smell of blood and flowers. But inside, she knew she could never leave it behind. She carried Alexandra with her now, the sorrow, the rage, the laughter. Her eyes were empty, her heart heavy, her soul branded with the memory of a woman destroyed and reborn as vengeance. And behind her, in the ruins of the village, the well waited. Its stones glistened with dampness, its mouth dark and hungry. Anyone who dared to approach would hear it. The faint sound of a woman laughing, a sound that promised death to all who would ever dare to laugh at another's shame. The legend had been born.